Right, thanks, Chris. Thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, so I know it's kind of getting late and you've taken a lot in today, but hopefully I've got something interesting to say. My name is Etienne Le Roux. It's a very French name for a very South African guy. I work for a company called Turner Townsend. Now, we are a global consultancy specializing in cost management and project management services in the property, infrastructure, and natural resources industry. Now, as BIM has been adopted more widely globally and in the region, us as Turner Townsend have found that there is definitely a need for us as a consultancy to evolve and actually adopt new ways of working to actually work in a BIM environment. So we're actually moving away from the traditional 2D based workflows and we are now finding ourselves that we're having to upskill ourselves and work in collaborative BIM environments more often. So really, I'm a senior BIM consultant, but I work very closely with our cost managers. I'm not a cost manager myself, but ultimately I'd like to come and share some of our experiences and lessons learned that we've had on other projects. So very quickly, we're going to start off with just a bit of a background to BIM and all the cost management activities that are linked to it. We'll talk about the conditions for success. What do you have to set up to make it work? We'll talk about the risks, because there are some risks for cost managers working in these environments, and then we'll talk a little bit about the workflows and the practical processes involved, and at the end I'll just show you some examples of some of the lessons that we've learned, and hopefully you can take that away with yourselves. So, of course, you know, we've simply moved over time, moved away from paper to 2D CAD processes, and ultimately we are now finding ourselves working in these BIM environments with intelligent objects. But BIM doesn't solve all your problems in terms of measurement and quantification. And as a matter of fact, we still face the same problems that we did many years ago and still do today. So these intelligent models are really just as good as the information that's inside them. It's not just about the 3D geometry, but actually from very early on, even stage 1 and 2, the data and the information that's in those models is very important to our cost managers. And that's what's important from a perspective of a cost manager. What does good look like? What does a good BIM model with good data look like? And you know, some of the cost managers here today might have only worked in a 2D workflow and done measurement of drawings, but actually, what does a good BIM model look like in the future? They will have to understand that bit more and more. So essentially, the tools have changed and the outputs have changed. We no longer measure with rulers of paper, and obviously over time, these 2D CAD measurement tools came along, which greatly improved the efficiency and the speed that we could take off and measure. But ultimately, we're now working in a 3D environment with 3D objects, and that requires different tools and different processes. Now, there are many tools out there. Costex, Glodon, Causeway, Vico, many out there. I'm not here to tell you which ones are best. It's really up to yourselves to test these products against each other and see which ones fit into your workflows more effectively. So again, it's all about technology and the process. It's not just about the 3D models. You can quite easily get the measurement from a door based on its 3D geometry. But what if that door is actually classified as an internal wall when it's actually an external wall? What if the fire rating is wrong? When you start scheduling and grouping your objects in, and actually trying to populate a cost plan, they will be wrong. So it's very important that your designers understand that these models will be used for costing and what requirements there are from a cost management perspective. So just very quickly, the conditions of success, again, These are just some of our experiences. First of all, I think it's very, very important that clients clearly set out the requirements for the project. Now, this doesn't just refer to cost management, but what BIM uses will be used during the project. And especially if there is a cost management function, if that's one of the BIM uses, then that must be clearly written into a contract, which brings me on to the second point. Contractual arrangements. You can't just expect someone to carry out a BIM use if it's not in their contract. Very, very often we deal with designers where they're being asked to work in a BIM environment, but because the clear definition isn't there and it is not in their scope of services, it's very easy for them to turn around and say, actually, we're struggling a bit with this. We've never worked on a BIM project where you've quantified our models and produced cost plan from it, so sorry, we're not doing it anymore. There needs to be a robust contractual arrangement in place. Common data environment. I'm sure today there was a lot spoken about common data environment. It's very important for cost managers to be part of that process. And in that electronic document management system where we have all our models and all our file specifications, version control, good information management, and good protocols is absolutely key for cost managers to understand what is the latest information, what am I comparing it against, how has it evolved over time. And then finally, BIM execution planning. A good BIM execution plan is very, very important. And it's not just a designer who actually inputs into a BIM execution plan. Everyone plays part of that. And cost managers must be there at the table from the very start to tell them what their requirements are, in what format do they need it, when do they need it, so that the designers actually understand what information is required over time. And again, even though you might have all those success factors set up, there are still some risks. Of course, late engagement in a BIM process is very, very risky. I would heavily advise against introducing BIM at the later stages. It just is very, very disruptive and causes a lot of risks in the project. And in terms of clients just wanting BIM, this almost leads on to the previous slide where I said clear definition is very, very important. Also, supply chain. We're finding that not many cost managers are able to work in a BIM environment. So make sure that you're appointing the right team for the right job. And then data standards. I know Alan has already spoken about data standards and measurement standards. Again, that brings me on to the very important clear definition that must be stipulated from the start. So again, NRM1 or your BCIS codes, they can actually be attributed to the objects in the model, which makes it a lot easier for cost managers to segregate and map it to items in a cost plan. POMI codes, we've spoken about them briefly. Again, you can actually embed them into the model so that you can easily produce a bill of quantities. Uniformat, another classification code, working on projects now where it is actually requested by cost managers to have these embedded and encoded into their models for them to more easily produce a cost plan. The RICS released some very good professional guidance last year. Again, Alan, I believe, was part of the working group who produced this. I would definitely recommend all cost managers to go and have a read at this, and also go and note the level of detail as it increases over time. You might start off with an LOD 100 model where you can only use the internal areas and volumes produced, whereas later on from stage 2 or 3 onwards, you can actually, at an LOD 200 or LOD 300 level, more and more information becomes available, and cost managers must understand what information is going to be there. Typical, some elements are not modeled at all. Skirting boards, architraves, sometimes ironmongery, that might only be modeled on later. In fact, sometimes it's not modeled at all. So again, go and have a look at this. Then just quickly, we're looking at the processes and the workflows pre-contract. So essentially we start off with your model definition, so that's now secured and put very clearly defined in the BIM execution plan. Your designers then start off creating their models, and at LOD 100, with the Costex, the tools that we are currently using, we are importing an exchange format called a DWFX. So we need to actually export those DWFX files. We then use a checking tool, Solibri. Again, many other checking tools out there, but it's really, really important to validate the data before you actually put that into your quantification software to extract those quantities. And it's important to understand that between a stage, for instance, 1 and 2 or 2 and 3, the process actually gets repeated iteratively. So even on a monthly basis or a bi-weekly basis, you can actually link your models to a cost plan. So any changes that you make on a weekly or bi-weekly basis is reflected in your cost plan. When you then get to the next stage, the end of the next stage, the client reviews, checks the budgets and the brief. And at that point, you move on to the next stage, and the LOD, or the level of detail and information, increases again. So on a high-rise, for instance, very early days, LOD 100, all the information that in terms of massing, you can actually specify in the brief the circulation areas, bedrooms, in this case is a high-rise hotel, bedrooms, kitchens, circulation areas, storage cupboards, and very quickly you can actually extract those volumes and areas and apply rates to them to populate a cost plan. Moving on, when you get to LOD 200 and above, you can start doing elemental cost plans. So cost manager are able to extract quantities directly from the model and again associate them with items in a cost plan. In terms of the attributes, again, I talked earlier about the importance of checking models and how important it is to check the data. For instance, within this measurement standard, it says that no deduction shall be made from items required to be measured by area for voids of less than 1 meter squared. So again, if that was automatically extracted, the software doesn't know what these rules are. So cost managers play a very vital part to understand what quantities have been extracted from the model. They must be checked to see if they're actually in line with these measurement standards. And again here, just an indication of, for instance, the ceilings in a cost plan being mapped across into a cost plan with the rates applied to them. So any changes made in the model will be reflected in the plan itself. Again, working in a common data environment, designers must use good versioning and good information management all around, really. The software tools now allows you to compare one model with the next. So one revision of one model will change, and whether it's a week or 2 weeks or a month, you can actually very quickly see which elements have been added, which have been removed, and which have been modified. So visually, we can now see how the design has changed and how that has actually influenced the cost and the budget of the project. Then going post-contract, it can be argued that contractors have a slightly more difficult time dealing with many different models segregated into packages, and again, it's really important here where models get segregated. You can't just have one massive model which your other cost managers can't use. Typically, they might only be able to open a file of 200 meg or 500 megabytes. These packages must be split down and segregated so that everyone can actually use them. It's not just about your designers being able to handle big models. And again, going further then, at LOD 400, so fabricating models, this allows us to actually check variances in the design to compare subcontractor models against the bill of quantities to actually see where those cost variances have come in. You can also, throughout construction, valuations can be made based on the packages as they are completed and verified on site so that payment verifications can be made. This is just a quick example of the usefulness of having activity IDs, BOQ codes, actually linked to a program so that you can very clearly see how the program is progressing and how costs and valuations can be made against the program, whether you're on track, and monitor cash flows accordingly. So just in terms of our lessons learned, again, I might have covered some of these already. Level of detail and data in the model is very, very important. Cost managers must understand what is in there, what should be in there, and in what format. Lack of consideration by the designers of how others are going to rely on the BIM model. Again, if you stipulate it in your BIM requirements at the very start and your designers are aware of the requirements, then this shouldn't really be a problem. Interoperability and hardware capability. I briefly mentioned the fact that some cost consultants aren't actually able to open large models. We also know about a lack of interoperability between file exchange formats. Not all softwares can actually open other types of software. You know, your cost managers must stipulate what format they need to receive to produce their own outputs. And then not following measurement standards, cover that. Misalignment of naming conventions, again, bad modeling is just not acceptable, and hopefully over time, as the industry matures, we will see a higher level of quality models coming through that our designers and cost managers can use. A very trivial issue, like not setting the decimal places correctly and actually getting volumes in millimeter cube, for instance, can cause havoc. So a very, very small point, but very, very important as well. And also remember that information can still be contained in 2D format. We are currently working on a project where the landscape architect they just don't have the capability of working in a BIM environment. So all their designs is actually still being done in 2D. So be mindful of the fact that you'll be working in a BIM 3D environment and also measuring and estimating from 2D outputs coming from other consultants. And running them in parallel needs really good control. Poor geometry, again, as time moves on and as our designers get better with understanding what information is required for cost management, hopefully this is something that will just disappear over time. And then just a few examples again. Another rule of measurements says that door openings should not be deducted for the area of a wall. Again, automatically, in this case, it will be deducted, so cost managers have a role to play there and actually make sure that the quants are in line with the measurement rules. Here you have an internal wall which is actually classified as an external wall. So you might have a partition wall inside, but that wrong data there, if you schedule that off, is actually going to give you the wrong amounts for your external walls. So again, something to be very mindful of. Cost managers must almost interrogate these models and make sure that the information inside them is correct. Still don't know how this happens, but we see this a lot. Duplicate items. Sometimes you see duplicate walls, almost 2-3 walls inside each other, columns over and over. You know, that's going to double, triple the quantities that you extract from that model. It's impossible to see if you don't actually check it because they're exactly on top of each other. So if you were to just walk through a model, it's very, very hard to spot duplicates. You almost need you almost need a software that can actually do the model checking for you. Again, overlapping volumes will result in over-quantification. So here you have separate structural models containing exactly the same elements in 3 floors. Again, if you look at one model and then you look at the other model, you might not realize that. And actually, your quantities coming out of that will be completely wrong because when you put them together, they're actually overlapping. Rogue items. Again, this is just perhaps designers not checking their own models and making sure that they're good. There's just a random piece of ceiling inside a wall. Again, we spot these all the time, just rogue items, which isn't actually removed from the model and can give you the wrong quantities. Again, structural columns just moving all the way up through all the floors and actually not stopping at the base and the top face of a slab, actually going straight through all the way. It's going to produce the wrong quantities in terms of your concrete. So very important. This is something we see all the time because it's actually very quick for designers to evolve the design using this method. Some objects are just grouped together because, again, this eases the efficiency within design. But if you were to measure that, it would actually just give you the area of one object as opposed to separate objects. Again, designers must understand that they need to be separated. They must be separate items for you as a cost manager to actually extract those quantities correctly. Top left, that is finishes such as tile walling. Wall tiling must be modeled as separate elements. This doesn't happen all the time. Again, I would actually advise against modeling finishes. It's not always necessary. And then the top or the bottom right, again, finishes actually, if you were to schedule that off from the wall areas, it would actually calculate the whole wall, when in reality, we don't actually complete our finishes all the way to the slab, but maybe just above the ceiling. So all that extra area that you have quantified from your model is actually wrong. It will be less than that. And then again, I mentioned landscaping. It's not just landscaping, signage. We work with irrigation designers who are just currently not working in a BIM environment. They produce 2D quantification, 2D drawings. So there is still a manual output and a manual measurement that needs to happen. However, sometimes landscape designers do design in using 3D authoring tools. However, I would say that they're not that well suited yet. So paving, soil, soft surfaces, and grass in Revit in particular can't handle that very well. So they are actually modeled as floors. So benches, planters, and other things are actually modeled as concrete slabs. So you can see that if a designer didn't interrogate the model and he was just to quickly extract the quantities and add it to concrete, it would actually give him the wrong quantities altogether. And then just to finish off, really, I think cost managers will become even more valuable project team member because they require a very deep understanding of all the building elements in these models. And they can actually validate the correctness and the completeness of the data in the models, and working very, very closely throughout the design and not just producing a cost plan at the end of each stage. They'll be able to report more accurate estimates faster using BIM so that they can spend more time making better informed commercial decisions. And after all, they are maintaining a living cost plan. And like Alan said, we are designing to cost, or we should design to cost. We shouldn't be costing a design. And ultimately, this can avoid the need for value engineering. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Just a final chance, the last session of the day, to ask some questions. I must admit, all of the lessons learned that you were talking about up there, I've personally come across every single one of those. So it's not. These certainly aren't isolated occurrences. And I suppose from my point of view, I guess what we're saying is the cost manager actually has to be there earlier, but it's not unusual for cost management to happen earlier, but it feels like the cost manager's got to be integrated into the design team earlier. Would you say that's the case?
Totally. And I think actually, from Turner and Townsend's perspective, being project managers and cost managers, typically, we are finding ourselves being much more integrated into the design teams. I'm actually working on a project now where I'm working from the architect's office. Again, so working directly with them, understanding how the design is evolving over time, and making sure that all our estimates and the costing of the design is reflected in the development of that, and making sure that, again, we are designing to cost and not the other way around. So very true.
Any questions at all? Any hands up? Can I see? There's one there actually, yeah, just at the back. So one at the front and one at the back. So we take these two, please. First, Rasha.
Yeah, thank you very much. I believe you guys as cost managers should be really the first guys, let's say, pushing BIM into the project, because the benefits are there. I mean, the complexity of the projects are really clearly showing that there are items that you cannot quantify without BIM. They are that complex that you do need BIM to even give a quantity to them. On top of that, cost and quantities are governing the project, so it's very, very important to have the benefits there. In your projects, I mean, all the risks, all the issues you've been showing really sound familiar to me. I mean, we were seeing blinding, which is 10 millimeter, or such view on the columns. I do see it very often. We're trying on the projects to avoid that through defining the modeling guidelines, through reviewing it, and involving cost managers, and that is true value for the project, definitely. Also reviewing and correcting, but from your point of view, I mean, we are BIM consultants, so we're trying to bring everybody on a round table and take their view. But being involved in BIM as a cost manager, what's your action when you see like stuff like that? I mean, I saw that you're reviewing, but what's your action? What is the support you were giving to the supply chain? Obviously, they were not working to deliver such the model that meet your needs later on. What's the action in there, in such cases, from your side?
To be quite honest, I think it's perhaps a case of industry maturity. Again, typically designers used to design, or you use 3D authoring tools for the production of drawings. So it was merely an output and a means of producing drawings. But over time, and as the industry is maturing, we are finding that they are waking up to the fact that, in fact, the information that I produce today is actually being used for multiple other uses, whether it's for costing, whether it's for sequencing and analysis, or for operational use. There are many stakeholders that are part of the BIM process. And I think it is perhaps hard to please everyone. And designers probably have a hard time now, because all of a sudden they just used to produce drawings. Now all of a sudden they're producing models that multiple stakeholders are using, and they don't want to be held accountable for that. So it's perhaps slightly an onerous task for them to all of a sudden please everyone. But again, I believe over time it will just become part of the process, and as a level of education is introduced, modeling standards, quality checks, and all the rest, I think it's just something that will naturally over time improve the quality of projects.
It's an interesting point you're making, actually, Rasha, because I know from a cost manager, duplicate elements are just so hard to believe. It's not to understand how on earth can this happen. Yet, if you spoke to the designer, you could probably get a pretty consistent answer why it's actually happening. But certainly, the cut lines being wrong as well is more about not actually bringing that cost management early enough in the game, isn't it? Because this isn't the designing is one profession and cost management is another. So it's again driving collaboration. It's a point we brought up. In fact, it's been going on throughout the day.
Totally.
There's another question at the back there. If we could, you've got your microphone. Great.
Yeah. Thank you. Hi. Really a question with regards to the complexity of certain projects. It's great that the tools that we're seeing here are going to create a cost estimate that's accurate, or hopefully accurate, to the model. But where we have projects where maybe the geometry is particularly complex or curved in all sorts of ways, One of the problems that I see us having is that when contractors come along to tender for those projects, so we've created this cost estimate based on our model, which is quite accurate. But when contractors come along to mitigate the huge risk on a really complicated project, they're then having to, you know, to put those prices up. So you have this disassociation between the cost that was produced from the model, from yourselves, and the risk that the contractors perceive in actually completing that project.
Yeah, see, again, I wonder whether that is really a BIM problem. I believe that's maybe more just a commercial problem. That isn't really something that directly is affected by the use of BIM. I think perhaps, again, contractors commercially need to be more aware, and the fact that we're now using BIM has an impact on them. And again, they just need to look at their business model and how to actually absorb more accurate quantities being taken off.
Any other questions? Any other questions coming out of that at all? No, I think that's probably it. Etienne, thank you very much for that. It's a big subject and something that's it's certainly going to be. It's almost like cost management is finally catching up with the design side around BIM, isn't it? And it's creating questions, but it's also again driving quite a lot of collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand for Etienne.
Thank you.